Part 8. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 72. Roxad leaned over and said, Sierra. Sierra glanced at the dark sea, forcefully withdrew her hand that was held by him, and cruelly turned her head away from looking at the eyes that were still full of hope. You go, Luoxied, I said. I won't leave. There was no movement for a while, but the sudden shaking of the hull and the sound of a fish tail falling into the water made her quickly turn around. Empty boats, mist-filled calm sea, even small waves disappeared. Luoxied, who was heartbroken by her, left really neatly. Sierra twitched her lips, but this was the best ending. If he didn't come back, one of the 3 stones in her heart would fall. He's gone, Khalida asked. It should be. As soon as he finished speaking, the edge of the boat was suddenly grabbed by a webbed claw sticking out of the water. The hull of the boat swayed, and Sierra fell to the edge, with water splashing on her face. Her eyes looked at Roxad, who resurfaced from the water in great surprise. A gentle kiss pressed against the lips without warning, and a liquid filled with the smell of rust was introduced. Sierra's eyes widened suddenly, and Khalida next to her also covered her mouth, looking in disbelief at the scene of one person and one fish kissing across the boat and the sea. The kiss with the taste of cold sea water didn't stay on Sierra's lips for long before Luoxied let go of the boat and gently touched her face with his webbed paws. I will come back with the legs you like. What? Sierra was stunned. She did not understand this sentence. Rox used the language of the mermaid tribe. What did you feed me? She touched her lips, and the taste in her mouth was weird. Luoxied curled his lips and just said, remember me. He retracted his hand and leaned back. The thick black fish tail emerged from the water and dived in an arc, completely disappearing in front of the 3 people. Sierra stared blankly at the sea, still savoring the taste in her mouth. It was different from any previous kiss. Khalida said in a tone of shock and wonder, not only did you tame a deep-sea mermaid, but you also took possession of him. Have you ever had a one-night stand? Sierra was brought back to her senses by her exaggerated voice, sat down opposite her again and said, no, we just kiss sometimes. What does that feel like? Khalida asked, gossiping. Sierra was silent for a while. Wet, his teeth are very sharp. Your bravery is beyond my imagination, Khalida said with starry eyes. Sierra, She rushed home before dawn. After thanking Khalida again and again, before entering the house, Sierra heard her whisper again from behind, the son of David's family has returned from the colonial war, and their family will hold a welcome party for the soldiers. When the time comes, you will accept it. Remember to go when you get the invitation. Colonial war. Sierra stopped and turned around. With which country? Kingdom of Saint Laurent. Haven't you seen the news before? Khalida said interestingly. I think it will be a matter of time before we become the colonial empire there. Recalling the ship that Rose Hill said before about coming from the colony, Sierra blinked. I understand, you have worked hard today, go back and rest early. The door from the kitchen to the outside was closed. Sierra took off her shoes and quietly went upstairs to her room. What she didn't expect was that the door to Anashi's room was open and the light was on. Sierra, she stood at the door in her pajamas, her voice hoarse and unpleasant. Where have you been? You didn't sleep all night? Sierra stopped in front of her door, truly shocked. I heard the sound of a car. Where have you been in your pajamas? Anna 11 stared at her closely, her eyes almost swollen into walnuts if she looked closely. Sierra raised her eyebrows. I'm hungry, go to the kitchen to find something to eat. Always have a cookie jar in the room. Oh, I've finished eating that too, and I'm hungry again. Anaxi was speechless. After a while, she said, I went to give Eric money today, and it turned out that he was not short of money at all. He thought I was looking down on him. Sierra looked at her doubtfully. If you didn't eavesdrop on my words and go to give him warmth, wouldn't it be fine? Just like if you didn't deliberately cut my finger, Mr. Rosehill wouldn't bandage my wound, and burn the fireplace for me in case I catch cold. These opportunities to gain favor were brought to her by her own hands. Anaxi had nothing to say and slammed the door. Baffling. Sierra yawned lazily, poured out all the cookies in the cookie jar in the bedroom, and then threw herself on the bed and fell asleep. Within a few hours, the servants got up in an orderly manner, and the manor began to come back to life. Sierra refused to go downstairs for breakfast on the grounds of feeling unwell, and stayed in bed until noon before going to the bathroom to take a bath. She was wearing thin clothes, and the sea breeze in the early morning was cold, which directly resulted in a cold. A sneeze. She sat in the bathtub and sneezed, then received a reminder from the servant outside the door, "The Duke of Rosehill's car has arrived. Are you still going downstairs for your appointment? When I was at his house that day, I heard him say that a ship from the colony had landed, and he wanted to go with her." Sierra leaned against the wall of the bathtub and touched her somewhat hot forehead. "Go." After taking a bath, she put on a warmer rose-red coat and a beige silk scarf, and after simply tying up her long brown hair, Sierra went downstairs. So far, the manor is peaceful, and no one has noticed that the mermaid has been lost. Lizzie was receiving Rosehill in the reception room, and Anashi and Josie were nowhere to be seen. "I'm late." Sierra opened the door and went in with a nasal voice. "Let's go, Mr. Rosehill." The blonde vampire on the sofa stood up gracefully and stood side by side with her. He turned his head and noticed that she was listless. Uncomfortable, his tone was mostly gone compared to the cold feeling before, and Sierra had not yet gotten used to the soft inquiry. "No," she touched her nose, "I just kicked off the quilt last night." Lizzie didn't feel at all the bad mood he had when he had a fight with Sierra last night. He kindly told the two of them, "Have fun." Not long after getting into the car, Sierra felt dizzy. The road that is usually wide and flat will be bumpy, and uncomfortable for her. She moved to the side and rested her head on that strong arm. "I'll stay here for a while. Call me when you get to your destination." The soft voice was low-spirited. The stiff young man lowered his eyes. "You didn't sleep last night." "I slept." Sierra rubbed her hot cheek against the cold fabric of the other person's sleeves, "but I caught a cold without covering myself with the quilt, and my head is a little dizzy." Rosehill noticed that her body temperature was a little strange and raised his hand to touch her face. The cold palm felt like it had touched a small stove, and his fingertips trembled because of the heat. Then he pinched the girl's chin and lifted her red face. "You are seriously ill." Rosehill frowned slightly. "Oh, I didn't expect so many people to comment, ha ha ha. I also want to give each male protagonist a home, but the website doesn't allow it. Depending on the situation, I will write some extra stories about each protagonist. The main purpose of this article is to buy stocks. Let's guess who the male protagonist is." After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 73. "It's not serious." Sierra held his hand and buried her face in his palm. "Let me cool down for a while." Rosehill urged Aldine, who was driving ahead, "Go to the hospital." "No," she frowned dissatisfied, let go of him and lay down on those straight thighs in the bumpy car. "I want you, I'm just a little hot." Rosehill lowered his head, his eyes flashing slightly. Aldine glanced at the girl through the rearview mirror who still seduced her even though she was sick. Her brain must be burned out. "You're just confused." Sierra pressed against those two extremely powerful and muscular ice thighs, contentedly. Aldine turned the car around and said, "It's better to take more medicine." "My medicine?" Sierra's cheek, which was originally facing the front seat, suddenly turned away. "My medicine is already here, right, Mr. Rosehill?" Aldine closed his mouth. A look of disgust appeared on his face. His master would probably throw her out. Rosehill, who was praised as a pill, silently raised her hand, put his cold palm on the back of her head, and then touched her gently like a lover. Aldine looked away silently. He wanted to say something, but he didn't even dare to think about it. Sierra was originally not sure whether this disgusting trick would work, but now it turns out that love words are very earthy, and they are just right for an old antique who has lived for who knows how many centuries. He would take the initiative to touch her when he was awake, and the effect was unexpected and amazing. When the car arrived at the entrance of the hospital, Rose Hill personally carried the sick girl out of the car and entered the hospital. A high-end VIP ward and an emergency doctor are specially provided to serve them. There is a slight fever but not serious. Take some aspirin and pay attention to rest and replenish fluids. This is the only thing we can do. The doctor quickly made a decision on these minor problems. The nurse brought pills and a cup of warm water and placed them on the bedside. She secretly glanced at the Duke sitting on the Windsor chair next to the bed and blushed silently. Rose Hill said slowly to the girl leaning on the bed, "Take medicine." "My eyes are sore and I don't want to open them." Sierra turned her head and said to the source of the sound, "Feed me." The next second, a small medicine bottle was thrust into her palm. "I can't seem to lift my hands." Rose Hill glanced at her and mocked, "Do you have a cold on your hand too?" The chain reaction is that once the body is weak, you can't lift your hands. Sierra pursed her lips. "Are you going to feed me or not? If not, ask the nurse to come." "Let me do it, Miss Sarah." The nurse who was called was about to come over to give her medicine to the delicate girl, when Rose Hill, who was sitting motionless, took the medicine from Sarah's palm. He asked the nurse stiffly, "How many pills should you take?" "Mr. 3. Sarah resisted the upturned corners of her lips, closed her eyes and opened her mouth to wait for feeding. Probably fearing that she would choke, the cold hand spread out 3 times to feed her small pills. The bitter taste spread rapidly in her mouth, causing a large amount of saliva to secrete. She couldn't help but lick the finger that brought the last pill into her mouth. Rose Hill's hand suddenly stopped and froze in mid-air. The person next to me didn't respond for a long time. Sarah, who was almost suffering from pain, wrinkled her face and urged, "Water, hurry up." The warm water cup was brought to her mouth, and she immediately raised her hands to hug it, taking a few big sips. The pills were taken down with more than half a glass of water, and the astringent taste in the mouth was washed away. Sierra then let go of the cup and let Rose Hill take it away. She exhaled, "I'm alive." "Can't you lift your hand?" a cool question came from the side. Sierra's expression froze. She pretended to cough a few times, turned her back and lay down and huddled under the quilt, saying in a weak voice, "I'm going to lie down for a while and wait for the medicine to take effect." Rose Hill stared at her guilty back and licked her wet fingertips, which was being swept by a searing heat that made her unable to cool down. The corners of his tense mouth turned up slightly, with a hint of amusement. Sierra, who was already groggy, actually fell asleep on the bed in the end. The waves crashed on the beach, and a piece of milky white foam rushed to the feet and then receded. Sierra sat on the damp sand, the sea breeze blowing up to her nose without any smell. She lowered her head inexplicably and found that her coat had turned into a gorgeous princess dress. The wet bright red skirt was stuck to her legs in layers, and there were fine grains of sand on her chest. She looked like she had just been fished out of the sea. "Come up. What's the situation?" "Princess Sierra, who has 3 boats, I saved you." A beautiful sound came from the ocean in front of me. Sierra looked toward the source of the sound, her eyes suddenly widened. The silver-haired Luxid slowly emerged from the water, with 2 large pink shells hanging on his broad chest, which could barely cover his sensitive parts. His long light blue tail was stranded on the beach, with scales like encrusted with sparkling diamonds. The whole body is sparkling. Sierra rubbed her eyes hard and murmured in disbelief at the unchanged scene before her, "Lucid." "Sierra," he smiled at her, looking actually full of lust. She stuttered a little, "Why do you wear a shell hood? Why has your tail changed color?" The beautiful mermaid lowered her head with a self-pitying expression, Did my tale scare you? I'm sorry, I came to save you because I saw you sinking into the water. Why is this line so strange? Sierra squeezed her arm hard. It didn't hurt, not at all, she was dreaming. While she was happy, she was also shocked as to why she had such a terrible dream. It must be aspirin. Sierra wanted to stand up and run away, but her white ankle was suddenly grabbed by a hand. Why are you running? L'Occitane dragged the man back dissatisfied and pressed his wet body on top. You don't like me like this. This is obviously based on your imagination. Sierra was stunned and asked subconsciously, aren't you playing the protagonist of the mermaid story in my dream? You don't like this story very much. You've told it many times. L'Occitane pressed her down and gently poked her heart with his webbed paws, feeling inexplicably aggrieved. Sierra touched the shell on his chest and immediately gritted her teeth. What evil have I done to dream of this? Why are you wearing pink shells? Those are only worn by female mermaids. I can take it off. L'Occitane smiled and complied with her request. Click. The two big pink shells that Sierra held with both hands fell apart instantly, and a few strings of small pearls connected to the mermaid's broad shoulders also scattered and hit her face. Staring at Rock's smooth chest with sunken muscle lines, Sierra was speechless for a long time. Sella? Don't you like it yet? L'Occitane came closer to her. Ah! Luxid, you must be a pervert. Sierra retracted her hand and pinched his face hard. What on earth is this shameful feeling of stripping off a woman's breasts? Get out of my dream. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 74. Boom. The dream was shattered by her resistance. Roxid, who was floating in the depths of the ocean, suddenly opened his eyes. His lake blue eyes let out a trace of depression, and his sharp webbed claws grabbed a passing sea fish. When you chew it in your mouth, the surrounding sea water is instantly stained red with blood. He swung his fishtail and moved on. Sierra gasped and woke up from the hospital bed at the same time. The light in the ward was not good, and it was dark with the curtains drawn. She turned her head and met a pair of emotionless black eyes. Woke up. Well, much better. Sierra wiped the sweat from her forehead, feeling much more awake. Lashid, Rosehill said coldly, Hongzhou. Sierra, Having a nightmare, a terrible nightmare. It's really special, he responded coldly. Sierra licked her dry lips, slowly sat up from the bed, and weakly changed the subject. You stay here with me until the afternoon. Rosehill said nothing, and his pale three-dimensional face returned to a condensed state. Is it too late for us to go to the port now? Sierra lifted the quilt, put down her legs and sat face to face with him on the bedside. I'm much better. If you don't go, I'll take you home. He stood up. Sierra grabbed his cold hand hanging by her side. I noticed you didn't wear gloves today. Rosehill's eyes dimmed. Then what? Then she slipped her fingers through his fingers and said, for the convenience of holding hands, I'll treat you to dinner. After that, we'll go around the port to eat and then go home. You should go home and rest. He frowned, not thinking that she was well enough to go for a walk on the beach. But I'm full of sleep and energetic now, and I'm also hungry. Sierra stuffed her feet into her shoes and stood up, holding him with one hand and straightening the crooked collar and scarf around her neck with the other. Going to eat? She raised her face and blinked her moist eyes. When Aldine heard Rosehill talking about finding a restaurant to dine, his expression was a little strange. You want to dine out? After receiving a positive response, he frequently looked in the rearview mirror at Sierra, who was pestering his owner. She didn't know that vampires couldn't eat anything other than sucking blood to survive. Except for a little liquid wine, any lumpy food chewed into the mouth would be spit out intact by the stomach. For this girl who might become his partner in the future, Aldine mentally raised her future status to a higher level. She is no longer just a descendant of her master, she is a huge problem. Aldine chose a place called the Afternoon Cafe. Elegant environment, chestnut cakes and various pastries and cakes, as well as expensive tea. Rosehill didn't eat much from the table. He occasionally drank tea and took a few bites of small scones. He mostly watched the girl opposite eating like a hamster. She was really hungry after not eating for a day. Sierra was sitting on the soft sofa, sipping imported black tea, and there was some noise outside the window. She turned around and saw many people standing along the street. A dozen soldiers came on horseback from the central street, wearing high red hats with feathers on their heads, uniform red uniforms and guns or swords tied to their waists. They are the soldiers who got off the slave ship. Sierra turned her head, and Rosehill on the other side was also looking out the window. She asked, "Why were you waiting for the slave ship?" "I purchased a group of black slaves," he said calmly. Buying a slave? Sierra was startled. "What's the use?" Rosehill was silent and said, "Business." Sierra pursed her lips. Selling slaves seemed normal in an era when colonial wars were frequent. "Okay, let's go to the port and have a look later. I haven't seen any black slaves when I was in Leicestershire." There were a lot of small pastries left on the three-story tray, and Sierra didn't want to waste it by asking someone to pack them. When she was checking out, she remembered that she went out empty-handed. She held the paper bag and said awkwardly, "I'll treat you next time." Rosehill glanced at her and said nothing. By the time Olding's car arrived at the port, it was already too late. Evening. The sunset glows with golden light on the sea, and half of the sun sinks into the water. Rosehill stood in the shadow of a corner, not even wanting to touch the corner of her robe with the gradually receding light outside. He hated the sun, hated it to the extreme, but the girl in front of him stood under the fiery red sunset, looking back at him like a pure and innocent angel. The bright girl frowned, her bright brown eyes feeling uncomfortable. "Those are the black slaves." Sierra pointed to the giant ship docked at the port, which was transporting goods for sale in an orderly manner. "Go faster. Don't stop," the crewman was urging them behind with whips. Strong and rickety men, thin and naked women, innocent and thin children. All of them are white-haired people with dark chocolate skin tones, and dull yellowish eyes. Rosehill nodded slightly and said quietly, "The most cost-effective labor force." "Cruel capitalist," Sierra complained inwardly. "What did you say?" He lowered his eyebrows, showing a bit of dissatisfaction. "I didn't say anything." Sierra turned her head and looked at the few children behind, and asked, "Where will they be transported?" Aldine was very happy to help his master explain this matter. The work done in J-parlors, racetracks, and fields, every part of their bodies has value. He added, "Master came to select slaves today, but he was delayed because of your affairs, so he can only wait until tomorrow." Sierra's heart was filled with a knot. Is such a young child also a labor force? "Oh, they usually don't live to adulthood." Aldine's voice was cruel and ruthless. Colonial wars are real and tragic in the long history of history. When these contents are presented in a fantasy world, it makes people feel no better. Most of the pampered nobles have no sympathy. The same goes for the indifferent vampire aristocrat. Don't expect him to have compassion for the labor force. A huge money empire is never built with sympathy. A hungry little girl fell to the ground with weak feet. The woman in front of her, whose hands were tied with ropes, immediately wanted to go back and pull her. She was shouting in the unfamiliar St. Laurent language, and she could easily tell it was the girl's name. A long rope with more than a dozen people on it stopped because of an error behind it. "Hey! Don't lie there. Get up and go." Sierra watched the man walk off the bridge waving his long whip, and endured it again and again, carrying the bag. Rosehill stepped out of the shadows to follow her. Sarah yelled at the man who was about to crack the whip, Wait. The man turned his head and saw the glamorous and beautiful girl and the big benefactor behind her. His slightly bored face immediately turned around and he greeted them respectfully. Duke Rosehill, are you here to choose slaves now? A good batch has already been shipped away. 1/ Has anyone guessed why Syrah dreams? Ha ha ha. 2/ Very few people buy werewolf stocks, he is a bright little son. 3/ The 3 male protagonists in this article do not have settings such as fragment fusion, they are independent of each other. 4/ The second round of P will be held this Saturday, please stay active. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 75. Syrah ignored the man's flattery and walked up to the child lying on the ground. The woman with her hands bound was begging and saying something loudly to her, her pale yellow eyes filled with hazy tears. She could not help her child, who was almost fainting from hunger, to get up, and her desperate look stung Syrah's eyes. She squatted down, not paying attention to the dirt on the child's body, and put her fair hands through the armpits of the thin arms, lifting the child up to her body with all her strength. The bag of packed food also came in handy at this moment. Would you like some chestnut cake? Sierra opened the paper bag, took out a piece of chestnut cake and handed it to her. The small black hands, as thin as chicken feet, cringed to catch the cake, while their panicked and weak eyes stared at Syrah. The noble in front of me looked beautiful, smelled delicious, and had the cleanest and most comfortable clothes. The child lowered his head and saw the stains on her coat that he had rubbed against her, and fear quickly filled her eyes. Syrah lowered her head following her frightened gaze and patted her back carelessly. It's okay, just eat. A slave who could understand the language of the Larini kingdom helped translate the words. The hungry and weak child was finally willing to eat the cake under most of the longing or contemptuous gazes. She swallowed it in big mouthfuls, barely daring to spend time chewing. The pitiful appearance made Sierra's sympathy flood like sea water, which reminded her of herself who was about to starve to death on a snowy night in London. She didn't care about the small crumbs of the chestnut cake falling on the back of her hand, she just gently supported the child's body and waited for her to regain her strength after eating. Rosehill stood behind her, the last rays of the setting sun shining a hint of rossiness on his pale face. What are you doing? Trying to buy her? No, I just saw that she was so hungry that she had no strength. Sierra shook her head. I have never seen slaves from the colony before. They are so miserable. Rosehill said coldly, the child is worthless, get up, let's go. What a cold-blooded statement. Miss, please save me and give me a job. Any job will do, as long as it's not going to J Hall. Please. The woman whose wrists were bound by the rope suddenly clasped her hands together and knelt down toward Sierra. She was confused when hearing the strange language with a cry in it. What do you mean? She ignored Rosehill's words and only asked the slave who could serve as a translator. Please give her a job to support the children. She can do anything with you except J Hall. Sierra was startled, and then looked behind the woman. The knees of these people were about to move, and everyone seemed to regard her as a beacon of salvation at this moment. Rosehill frowned, bent down and pulled her up. You don't need so many slaves. They won't bring you any profit except going to Hall J. He hugged her waist forcefully to keep her away from these dirty and smelly people. Syrah let him hug her, but she really began to think about this matter in her heart. There is no shortage of labor in the kingdom of Lilani, but there has always been a significant difference in the pay of male and female labor. Men are usually paid twice as much as women. This is also true for black slaves. Women are the lowest and cheapest. If she wants to start a business, this is the most cost-effective group of labor. Rosehill, who heard her calculations, tried to pull her back. That will only bring you trouble. No trouble, I just need a little money to buy them. Sierra leaned against him and thought, can you ask these people to help me keep these slaves first? I will go find Khalida tomorrow. Talk to her about borrowing some money from her. She clapped her fingers and said, I used to jointly own a butcher shop with Gail and the others, and my dad didn't have much pocket money left. The richest man in the country was right next to her, but she said in front of him that she was going to ask another person to borrow money. Rosehill lowered her eyes and tightened her fingers. Feeling that the flesh on her waist was about to be stretched out, Sierra raised her eyes in discomfort. What are you doing? Your waist is about to break. Why don't you ask me to borrow money? He asked coldly. Sierra said speechlessly, don't you think buying them is a trouble? It doesn't conflict with borrowing money from you. What a quibble. Sierra, then I owe you another favor. Rosehill responded coolly, is the debt still small? It seems like a lot. What if I can't afford it? She asked, tilting her head. Can you afford to pay back the money if you ask Khalida? How could he choke her to death with every word he said today? I won't let you lose money, Sierra assured him. Dear Mr. Rosehill, please lend me money to buy them. If I can't afford it in the future, I will give it to myself. You. Aldine, who had been acting as a wooden man for a long time, couldn't hold it back and said, is this last sentence your purpose? What you said is wrong. Sierra turned to look at him. You can't doubt the conscience of a young girl who wants to start her own business. That was just my final retreat after failure. Aldine reluctantly raised his lower lip, showing an awkward yet polite smile, with the words I'll just listen to your quibbles clearly written on it. While despising Rosehill, who was a slave girl, she paid a large sum of money for Sierra to pay for dozens of female slaves. The vampire, who has always borrowed and repaid, had his own plans at this moment. These people will be temporarily placed in the slave concentration camp in the town until Sierra figures out where to place them to work, and then she will pick them up. When she left, she gave all the packed bags of expensive pastries to the slaves, and told their masters, I need them to stay healthy and work for me, and not let them get sick or starve to death. The man glanced at Rosehill, who was full of nobility, and said respectfully, I understand, Miss. Sarah, who had bought a large number of people, began to worry about the night as soon as she got into the car. Now we not only owe a lot of debt, but we also have dozens more mouths to eat. She hasn't even drawn up a business plan yet, which is a bit troublesome. Regretted, Rosehill, who was leaning against the car window, was a little more lazy. The street lights shone into the car, making his blonde hair shine from time to time. No, it just takes some time. Sierra shook her head. She turned her face sideways and said, speaking of which, I still owe you 3 things. Is one of them completed now? After spending thousands of gold coins on his trip, he got sick, and even got a free meal. Aldine really wanted to have the ability to read minds and open up Sierra's head to see what she said so shamelessly. These words. Rosehill glanced at the girl's expectant little face and reluctantly said, forget it. Sierra smiled happily. When the car arrived at the gate of the manor, she relied on the dim light to block him, leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. I'm here, good night Mr. Rosehill. She was about to retreat when a strong hand suddenly pressed down on her waist, causing her whole body to fall onto his strong chest. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 76. Huh. Sierra, Eric's voice was outside the car window, full of doubt and danger. Siragan was still wondering why he suddenly took the initiative, and his heart suddenly shrank in fear when he heard this familiar voice. Rosehill looked across Sierra's face and looked out the car window, and said quietly, it seems that he is your friend. His palm stroked the girl's slender back again and again in front of Eric, and his lazy voice was low and provocative. He seems to be my friend. Sierra grasped a bit of the white village shirt exposed under his suit on his chest, and his lowered eyes flashed in confusion. I heard that he was interested in the feelings of 2 nobles. Rosehill lowered his eyes and landed on her lips. It turned out that he had heard those messages a long time ago. Eric stood by the car, holding back the jealousy in his heart. Sierra, get out of the car. I don't believe those lies. She raised her pointed chin, her voice was sweet and soft, and she looked at Rosehill with a seductive look, as if asking him, don't you know why I don't believe it? Not because I like you. Mr. Eric, what are you doing at the front door? The servants came up to stop him from getting too close to the car. When he turned back to explain, Sierra pressed Rosehill's chest and quickly kissed his lips, with a successful smile in her eyes. Okay, sir, you have to let me go back and talk to my friends. She opened her hands on her waist, moved to the other side, opened the door and got out of the car. Rosehill, who was leaning in the car, pursed her lips. After the kiss, he walked towards the other man. This scene was inexplicably eye-catching. Let's go. Sierra, who was not in particularly good condition, had just asked the servants to retreat when Eric grabbed her wrist. At this moment, he almost forgot his identity and boundaries, and his eyes were full of worry. Did you go out with him? He looked at her angrily. Are you hurt? Why is your face so pale? Glancing at the car that had gone away, most of the heart that Sierra was holding was put back into her stomach. She shook her head. I had a fever this morning, and the Duke took me to the hospital. Sick? Eric suddenly became worried. I haven't seen you for a while, and you are sick. This conversation sounded strange to the servants' ears. I took medicine and I'll be fine after a few days of rest. Sierra let him hold her wrist and asked weakly, why did you come here at this time? The two protagonists almost gave her a heart attack when they met. Fortunately, she still had a layer of window coverings with Eric, otherwise she would have been in trouble. Thinking of the scene he just saw, Eric became upset. Master Lizzie and I had a conversation. I originally came this morning, but there were a lot of things to prepare for the opening of the store, so I came late. He was supposed to wait at the back door to enter the house, but as soon as his nose smelled the smell of vampire mixed with her, he couldn't help but walk to the front door. Sierra understood after a moment's thought. She frowned and said, Dad must want to fire you because of the rumors on the street. I caused you to lose your job, she apologized. Work? Eric softened because of her worries about him. Don't worry, I'm not afraid of not having anything to do. Dad is your tribe's biggest employer, and you will suffer heavy losses. Sierra was still a little unhappy. Sierra. Eric leaned down and looked at her level. Making money is easy, not to mention it's not your fault. Sierra's eyes were obviously questioning, they obviously lived in such poverty. Eric, who saw her thoughts, said, we just don't want to be like Rosehill. There are high-profile and bloody vampires, and there are Les Jones' ordinary little werewolves. Of course, Sierra understands that these are completely two extremes of non-human life. Miss, the master is still waiting in the reception room, the servant reminded. Let's go in together. Eric let go of her wrist, took 2 steps and stopped, waiting for her to follow. I know it's probably useless to say this, but can I? His deep eyes rested on the girl's slender back and waist, with obvious disgust in his tone. Can you please stop letting him touch you all the time? Huh? Sierra pretended to be surprised. You saw it all? Eric nodded vaguely. Don't let him hug you, it's not safe. The last 3 words are completely used to decorate the redundant words in front. Sierra stopped as she stepped into the door. She held Eric's hand, and the servant led the way, not noticing the little movement between the two. She whispered to him, you are my only sincere partner, and I always believe in you. Eric lowered his head and couldn't help but ask, what about Duke Sui? Mr. Rosehill? I believe him too. Sierra smiled and said, as for what you said about unsafety, he helped me rescue a group of female slaves today. I'm worried about how to thank him. Do you want to? Can you help me think of a solution? Eric, who had just been excited for a while, suddenly fell back to the bottom. So we are the same. It's different. I only have one friend, and he's not even a friend. She defined her relationship with Rosehill as a love she couldn't get, and indeed it wasn't even a friend. There was nothing wrong with that, Sierra said with peace of mind. When Eric heard this, his heart sank. He felt that he had an extraordinary status in her heart and couldn't help but raise the corners of his mouth. You don't need to thank him. His money has been accumulated for hundreds of years. You spent the money ordering nothing counts. Hundreds of years, Sierra's clear brown eyes looked confused. Realizing that he had said something wrong, Eric quickly corrected himself. Family business, hundreds of years. Oh, that's it, Sierra nodded. So how old did that old-fashioned vampire live? A little curious. Anna 11, who had not been out all day, looked at the two of them with slightly swollen walnut eyes. I tried to persuade Dad for a day, but he still didn't want to let go. I'm sorry for Eric. Her attitude was as if she had been crying all day over his unemployment. Eric showed no emotion and simply said hello to her. I came here to tell Master Lizzie that you need to find a new hunter starting tomorrow. Lizzie originally had a bunch of words on her lips to dissuade this young man who was having an affair with his two daughters, but when she heard him resigning so neatly, she didn't react for a moment. This was not my intention, I mean, but your behavior has caused trouble to me and my family. Let me clarify this matter. Eric stood by the expensive patterned sofa without sitting down. His thick shoulders were straight, and his voice in the stage of voice change also faintly revealed the stability of a mature man. I like Miss Anish, and I have no relationship with her that is rumored on the street. Sierra raised her eyebrows slightly, and Anaxi on the sofa was not too surprised even though her expression was bad. It was not surprising to her that the family relationship value that had hit rock bottom could make Eric do this. Loozide's blood effect is half correct. Ah. Vote. Comment. Hold on. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 77. Eric said, some rumors came out during a chance conversation with Miss Anish, but I really have no interest in her. For Lizzie, having an Orion admit that he despised his daughter was even more embarrassing than telling the Orion to put aside his unwanted thoughts. The cigarette he had not smoked for a long time dropped some ashes to the ground. This is the best. Anaxi walked up to him, her weak face forced a smile, gentle and friendly. Eric, I understand your troubles, we are just ordinary friends. Sierra is the same as me. Being dragged in, Sierra attracted the attention of the three protagonists. She was quite looking forward to how Eric would respond. Friend Eric turned to look at her, with a clear hesitation in his eyes. He hesitated for almost a minute, and when Lizzie was about to catch suspicion, he nodded slowly, with a reluctant voice, yes, Sierra is also my best friend. There is still a difference between the best and the ordinary. Anaxi pretended not to understand what he meant and said softly, everyone just talk about it. You can go home early. Eric, it's already very late. I'll try again tomorrow, find a satisfying job and meet again if we have the chance. After crying all night, she seemed to have become smarter through crying, and even her speech became much more advanced. Sierra stepped aside and said to Eric, go back early. Lizzie was supposed to be taking the lead tonight, but he just didn't interfere in the friendly conversation between his two daughters and Orion. Fortunately, the purpose of dismissal was achieved, and he didn't say anything. I'll see you off. Sierra walked behind Eric, and the two of them went out of the back door, but Anaxi did not follow. Under the night, the tall and strong horse stepped on its hooves to welcome its owner back. Eric slowed down and said softly, the butcher shop will open in 2 days, remember to come. I know, I'll go. Sierra. Do you like Rose Hill? Sierra opened her eyes slightly, why are you asking this now? I won't compete with Anna 11 for my husband, so don't think too badly of me. Eric took a breath and said, you must be very reluctant for him to touch you. Sira, it's not that I am reluctant. Next time he asks you out, just pretend to be sick. Good. Satisfied that he had given her enough excuses, the werewolf boy mounted his horse and left. After Sira went back to her room to rest, Anaxi, who had been sitting alone in the living room for a long time, called a servant, I have a rabbit that has laid a litter of little rabbits. Sira will get up and finish breakfast tomorrow morning and ask her to go to the hayloft with me have a look. The simple servant nodded, I will inform Miss Sira. Wanting to have a good sleep tonight to soothe her sick and frightened body, Sira looked down at the pink fish tail below her waist and the two large shells covering her chest, and fell into deep thought. It was the same scene again, the same ocean, the same beach, and the same coconut trees, and there was no smell in the sea breeze. The only difference is that the fish stranded on the beach becomes itself. Did she start to have frequent nightmares because she missed rocks too much? Sierra sighed. Is her sleep quality so bad? Or is it because aspirin has side effects that haven't gone away yet? She tentatively touched her tail. It was smooth and smooth. The touch she experienced in the dream was limited, but it was quite realistic. What to do now? According to the plot of The Mermaid, should there be a prince waiting for him to give artificial respiration? She flicked her tail unaccustomedly and raised her eyes to look at the shore. On the white and sunny white beach, a person lay quietly there, wearing a platinum prince's uniform, with his long silver hair stained with gravel spread messily. When Sira looked over, she could only see half of the young man's perfectly curved jaw. She now had every reason to suspect that she was going crazy for Luxid's legs. Out of curiosity, she decided to hold up her hands, move her legs that were stuck together, and walk towards the beach with her big pink tail swinging. Even if you dream about it, just take a look at her prince. The water washing up on the shore would bring infinite strength to her tail, but as soon as they retreated, she lost the momentum to move forward. The fine sand rubbed against Sira's abdomen and tail. Although she didn't feel any pain in her dream, she was not used to moving with only her hands. She finally realized the hardships of landing a live fish. Those who lifted rocks from the sea to land were so inhuman. After moving forward a few meters with difficulty, Sira silently turned around and fled to the sea. Forget it, I'm too tired from climbing, so I don't care if I don't want to look at this tailless rocks. She went to swim twice in the sea to become a mermaid and wait for the nightmare to end. I hope that when she wakes up tomorrow morning at the age of 18, she will not wet the bed because of dreaming about so much water. The water washing over her chest and tail gave her an indescribable sense of comfort. Sira was waiting in the shallows for a big wave to hit her, and she suddenly looked forward to the feeling of her tail swimming. A shadow suddenly shrouded her head, and the long shadow helped her block the scorching sun. Which way are you swimming? After waiting on the shore for a long time without seeing her come up, Luosiet couldn't lie down anymore. He frowned and looked at the girl who turned her head and raised her face. When he met her moist, transparent, and confused eyes, he suddenly suppressed his dissatisfaction. Although this was a dream, Sira had never seen any dream that could be so real. Luosiet's face was like a high-definition Blu-ray picture in front of him. His snow-white skin, impeccable facial contours and lake blue eyes were simply tempting to commit crimes. Her eyes slowly moved down and fell on his straight and slender legs, and she murmured in a daze, "It seems that I am really crazy." Sela, Luosiet squatted down in front of her, letting the big wave in front of them soak them both. "What are you crazy about? I miss you so much." Seeing her cute look in response, he couldn't help but smile. Her smile was beautiful. "This time it was a dream I made up." Luosiet held her face and gently wiped away the little grains of sand on her little face with his thumb. His lowering eyes swept across her chest, his eyes dim. The way she looked almost naked without any clothes covering her skin was even more attractive than when she was wearing a skirt. Syrah stared at him without saying a word. Her ears caught the words he said about making up dreams, and the disconnected memory lines in her mind suddenly connected. You fed me a strange liquid when you left that day. Did that make you connect my dreams with yours? She asked with difficulty. The plot may be my unconscious thoughts, or your conscious thoughts. Control. It's my blood. He gently picked her up from the shallow water, which was difficult to move, and her wet tail splashed water on his legs. I told you not to forget me. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 78. So this is your way of not letting me forget. She seems to have escaped a male protagonist's death line, but she doesn't seem to have completely escaped. Sierra couldn't tell what it felt like now. Anyway, she was a little helpless. She was carried to a rock in the shallow water by Roxt, who had 2 legs, and sat sideways on his lap like a child. She was really not used to the sudden reversal of roles. The big pink tail weakly patted the rock twice. Luo Xied pressed his hand on her pink scales and touched them again and again. You obviously don't like the story of mermaids, why do you still tell it to me? Whether it was the dream during the day or now, she had strong resistance. He didn't understand and was a little lost. Sierra grabbed the silver hair on his chest and played with it around her fingertips, and replied helplessly, I wanted to teach you how to speak at that time, but I didn't really like the story. You don't like mermaids, what about the legs? He lowered his head. Looking at each other at a sudden close distance, Sierra thought for 2 seconds, threw away the hair in her hands and hugged his neck. How many times do you have to ask me before you give up? No matter how many times you ask me, my answer is like it all the same. The girl's back, which was only tied with a pearl strap, climbed onto the hand that was unique to humans. He sighed softly, I like you like this. What? Sierra ignored the hands touching her back. You won't run around when you have a tail. His hand on her fish tail slowly moved up. At that time, he could only squat in the water tank, waiting for her to appear with nothing to do all day long. Such days were lonely and boring. Even though there was no real over-the-top touch, Sierra still shuddered hard because he touched her tail. She bit her lip, are you planning to appear in my dreams like this every day? She felt that she would be exhausted mentally and physically, oh no, her body would be hollowed out. What kind of dreams do you like? I can weave them all, he asked softly with his smiling lips against her lips. Until he came back with his legs, he would come to her bedside from dreams every night and fulfill all her wishes. So the answer is yes. Sierra, who knew she couldn't escape, was silent for 2 seconds and said, next time, give me your legs back. Okay, Luo Xied responded in a low voice, blocking the girl's soft lips. Kissing is the best way for him to express his feelings. In his dream, he can unscrupulously press the girl's tail and make her belong to him only. Ah! Miss! Get up! The servant's hurried knock on the door woke up Siri, who was sleeping. She opened her eyes drowsily, and her first reaction was to touch her buttocks. The fabric of the nightgown was still dry and there was no bedwetting. Sierra suddenly relaxed and let out a long sigh of relief. That dream last night was really. She looked dimly at the curtains on the top of the bed, her cheeks burning. What's wrong? Sierra turned her face sideways and looked at the servant who rushed into the bedroom. The mermaid is gone. The mermaid kept in the laboratory is missing. She came to the bed in panic and opened the bed curtain. Yesterday, no one noticed that the mermaid was missing. This morning, when Anaxi brought fresh live fish to feed it, she found that the water tank was empty and the aquatic grass pile was empty. The servants searched the entire manor but found no trace of the mermaid. He just evaporated out of thin air. The mermaid that Lizzie spent a lot of money to buy was actually stolen, and he was furious. Syrah, who got the general idea from the servant, rushed to the study after washing up. Lizzie walked anxiously back and forth in the soft carpeted study. On the desk was the revolver left by Edward. "Sierra, did you see where the mermaid went?" Ms. Josie asked worriedly while standing next to the bookcase. "He's not in the tank." Sierra looked at Lizzie. "No, someone helped him escape." Lizzie turned around and softened her attitude slightly. "I don't want to doubt you, but your sister Anna told me the night before yesterday that you went out in the middle of the night and came home in the early morning." Sierra said innocently, "Really? But I didn't go out the night before. I heard the car's engine," Anashi replied. "I don't have to lie about that." She was more anxious than anyone else when the mermaid was lost. She specifically asked the system where he was this morning. What did the result show? A corner of the ocean beyond the scope. Who else could do this but Sarah? Only she would deliberately go against herself. "Everyone saw from your interaction with the mermaid at the freak show that you two were very close. Sierra, I think you should tell the truth." Ms. Josie helped her daughter unconditionally. "Did I tell you?" Sarah frowned impatiently. "Instead of wasting time on my suspicions, it's better to ask the two marine experts who are lying in bed in the ward what else they know about mermaids." Khalida was very reliable in this matter, and she was not worried at all about them sending people to investigate and expose the secret. Sierra was too lazy to pay attention to the family of three behind her, and directly exited the study and went downstairs to have breakfast. Josie said angrily, "Look, she is so arrogant," after she climbed onto the Duke. Lizzie said nothing with a sullen face, her eyes falling on the revolver on the table. Sarah finished breakfast alone, and the servant came to the table and said, "Miss Sarah, Miss Anna is waiting for you in the hayloft. She invites you to watch the rabbits together." New. She guessed that Anna 11 wanted to threaten her or have a showdown with her again, so it would be okay to go and listen. Sierra came to the backyard, a barn-like house built of wood, separated from the garden by a wall. She didn't see Anna 11, but she saw the little rabbit jumping back and forth inside. With fluffy brown or white fur and a small ball-shaped tail, it looks very good. When they are not being served to the table and turned into delicacies, Sarah still loves them very much. She knelt down and picked up the one that didn't run very well. She touched its long ears and said, "Hello, little cutie." The gray rabbit was motionless in her arms, very well behaved. Sierra curled her lips and touched it, and out of the corner of her eye she caught a glimpse of a scattered haystack in front of her. There was red blood dripping on it. She put down the rabbit in her arms and stood up, and suddenly found a few freshly stepped bloody footprints on the hem of her beige skirt on her thighs, and some on her hands. "It's the gray rabbits." Sarah suppressed her smile and walked to the pile of withered grass, and slowly kicked away the blood-stained layer of withered yellow hay with her feet. Seeing the things buried under the haystacks, she completely lost control of her expression. A litter of more than a dozen rabbits were beaten with stones, their intestines and stomachs were broken, and their white fur was sticky with blood. The blood was very moist, and it was soaked in the haystack and absorbed to prevent it from flowing out in a large area. These rabbits were tortured to death not long ago, in the early morning, or early in the morning. I saw a comment today saying that this article is unique. Ha 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 ha. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Goicheng. Chapter 79. Sella, you arrived so quickly. Anna came through the garden gate holding a small parasol, followed by a servant. "My rabbit gave birth to a litter of little rabbits yesterday, and I invite you to come." Her words were cut off by her teeth mid-sentence, and she suddenly turned into a scream. "Sierra! What are you doing?" Anashi threw away her little parasol and ran to the nest of dead rabbits, tears welling up in her eyes. "How could you do this?" She turned her head, looking at a criminal who had committed a heinous crime, and was furious. The servant also exclaimed, "Miss Sarah! How could you kill these rabbits?" Sira glanced at her bloody skirt and fingers. It seemed that she had abused a small animal, but this strategy of using small animals to frame people was a bit too much. Facing Chikai's crying face, she suddenly said sorry, then raised her blood-stained hand and waved it hard at Anna 11's pitiful little face. A crisp slap in the face, louder than the antique clock chiming in the morning. The servant who followed was startled by her sudden action. "Miss Sarah." The servant rushed forward and hugged Anaxi, who was covering her face and shaking. He turned to Sira and warned, "You can't hit your own sister." "Are you going to get out of the way?" Sierra slowly rolled up her sleeves. She would really get tired of pretending to be a little white flower girl for a long time. "That's the rabbit Eric gave me. Even if you don't like it, you can't bully me like this." Anna 11 recovered from the shock of the slap. The burning pain and humiliation made her furious. She probably didn't expect it. Sira would be so bold and directly slap herself in the face. No, that's not right either. She should have known that when she threw the ball and knocked out Myra's teeth. "Miss Sarah," the servant stopped in front of Anasai and spoke righteously, "you tortured and killed Miss Anasai's rabbit and then beat her. The master will be angry. Do you choose to go out and call for help, or are you beaten here? Or I drive you out of the manor." Sierra rolled up her sleeves, with a bright and moving smile on her face, but her eyes were cold and colorless. She had a close relationship with the Duke, and everyone in the manor knew about it. It would only take a matter of minutes to fire a servant. The servant hesitated between losing his job and protecting his master. She looked back at Anasai, but she pushed her away. "You won't be fired if I'm fine. Go call Dad over and let him see Sira's masterpiece." Sira admired Anaxi's courage. She didn't know that her stepsister Colonel was a barbarian who fought for food. She was a noble daughter of the upper class. She actually hated this kind of restraint. The thin wooden boards in the deserted hut couldn't block Anaxi's screams. There are only 3 ways for girls to fight: grabbing their hair, scratching their face, and pinching their arm flesh. Sira omitted these 3 steps in an unusually simple manner, lifted up her skirt and kicked the person down next to the nest of slaughtered rabbits. Seeing that Anaxi fell on her butt, and the newly patched slap marks on her face were also very symmetrical, Sierra patted the hem of her skirt stained with hay. "To be honest, I understand your mentality of wanting to kill me, but this nest rabbit has hit my limits. Anaxi is really thin, which is what any little white flower should be. When she fell into the rabbit nest with red and swollen cheeks, she was directly vomited by the disgusting animal carcass. Her whole body looked so miserable that it made her look so miserable." He was stunned but didn't get up to fight back. It seemed that he was willing to be beaten by her. As for the reason, Sierra could figure it out with her toes. Lizzie, who had not yet solved the mermaid's troubles, came with Josie, and all the anger reached its peak at the moment when the 2 sisters were fighting. "Sierra! Stop it!" At this moment, Anaxi staggered up and rushed into Josie's arms. She looked frightened and her whole body was trembling. Josie was startled by her miserable and pitiful appearance, and her tears instantly flowed out unambiguously. Lizzie, who learned what happened from the servant, stamped his cane on the ground, and said angrily to Sira, "What are you thinking about? Not only did you kill Anaxi's rabbit, but you also beat her? Just because of that, how many words did she say to you in the study? Now he has to wonder if the mermaid was really taken away by her. How stupid am I to kill her rabbit in broad daylight just waiting for you to find it? You have to do it secretly at night." Sierra shook her painful wrist. It felt good to release her natural instincts once in a while, especially after she beat up the protagonist who was supposed to be a heartthrob. This kind of pleasure was like swallowing a piece of honey in her throat, and her whole body was filled with excitement. Relaxed. She looked at Lizzie, whose wrists were trembling and wanted to hit her, and said calmly, "I eat meat, a lot of animal meat, but I don't abuse them. Just because I exposed your behavior, you used this method to threaten me not to talk nonsense, Anaxi cried and said, isn't it abuse when you eat spicy rabbit heads? You clearly know that I like rabbits the most. Why didn't you kowtow to it 3 times to say sorry when you ate the mackerel? It was disemboweled by a servant and poured lemon juice over it. Is this abuse? Anaxi choked, you are using strong words to make sense. Am I being unreasonable? Sierra ignored Lizzie's extremely dark face and continued to sneer at her, when you go hunting in the capital every summer, don't you point your gun at these rabbits or wild deer? You're not cruel. Hunting was the noble's favorite activity. She really didn't believe that Anna 11 wouldn't kill those animals in order to integrate with the nobles around her where Eric couldn't see. After all, she had even done such a thing now. Okay, Sierra, apologize to Anashi. Lizzie listened to the quarrel between them and the veins on her forehead jumped. You are not one of those low-level street gangsters. Don't roll up your sleeves and beat your sister in the future. If word gets out, who will be willing to marry her? You. In the daily life of an 18-year-old girl, she can never escape the curse of marriage. Sierra sounded irritated and turned around to leave. I won't apologize. Lizzie angrily yelled from behind, you are grounded. Until you apologize to Anashi. Otherwise, just stay at home and don't go anywhere. Anaxi was grounded in the front, and Sierra was grounded in the back. How could this stop a girl with a rebellious nature? She didn't even go back to her room or change her clothes. She went straight to the stable and took a horse, sat on it and rode away. What was smoother was that she didn't see Joey today, otherwise he would definitely be chasing her now. Josie was busy comforting her daughter whose face was red and swollen, and said to Lizzie in a sharp voice, I thought she was a good child. Is this her true nature? She is so arrogant. You should send her out to learn more etiquette. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Goicheng. Chapter 80. Lizzie was silent. Sierra seemed to be obedient only when she first came back, or maybe she had never really been obedient. Like Clemens, she was stubborn and disobedient. I will consider sending her to learn etiquette. These petty tricks were nothing to Sierra. Even if she made Lizzie look bad, she didn't think it was anything. In addition to the death line of the male protagonists, his final desperation was to be married by Lizzie to the domestically violent Marquis. So since she came to Cambodia County, she never thought that she would really rely on this family for her whole life. She would have to fight her way out for herself. This is more difficult than living in a small rented house in London, being a coder struggling with food and clothing, ugh. Today, she has to find a place for the slaves she bought back, so Sierra needs to seize the time to conduct on-site inspections and choose a place to settle them. As for what to do, that remains to be thought about. A group of police detectives who have never met before came to the town. When Sierra rode past the police station, there were a dozen men in suits or police uniforms outside. Someone greeted her, "Hey, Miss Sierra, how are you doing?" The man in a light gray suit squeezed through the crowd and came to her horse. He raised his head and saw that she looked unfamiliar. He explained one by one, "Hank is the person in charge of the racetrack, and the Duke of Rosehill is my boss." "Oh, hello, what are you doing here today?" Sierra was still not impressed. "Director Whitman suddenly died not long ago. The police detectives sent by the king of the capital came to investigate the cause of death." "Let's take a confession," he said with a smile, and the secret joy in his eyes almost overflowed. Sierra heard Rosehill tell her that he had done it, and even pretended that the hand was injured to save her and deliberately published it in the newspaper. The bandage was only worn for 2 days as a show. Sierra nodded and wanted to leave after saying hello. Then she turned around and asked, "You run a racecourse, so you must be familiar with the factories or open spaces here, right? Killing people and setting fires are all in the wilderness, so they should be quite good at finding an open space. It's okay, what's wrong? Is there an abandoned factory that is vacant and unwanted? I want to buy it. There was about 10 acres of open space in front of me. A rusty factory building stood in the middle and looked crumbling. It was surrounded by weeds and wildcats that had not been taken care of for a long time. It's about 10 minutes walk from the town, not too far away. Sierra didn't expect it to be so deserted. The person in charge of the horse farm who led her here said, "This place used to be a textile factory. There was a fire and everything was burned down. Many people died inside. Everyone thinks this place is unlucky and no one is willing to buy it." "This is your land too?" Sierra asked. "It belongs to Mr. Rosehill. He has so many properties that he probably forgot that there is such a place." Sierra, This is not a pillow given to sleepy people. Anyway, I already owe a lot of debt, so it doesn't matter if I owe another piece of land. Tell the Duke and I'll give you credit first." With the little pocket money she had, she could at best repair the broken factory first. Later, she would need to prepare funds to start the factory, so she could save as much as she could. Hank agreed generously, and Sierra added, "You are familiar with this place. Can you show me the small factories or workshops near the town?" "No problem." The young lady in front of him had a good relationship with his rare boss, and Hank was happy to help out with this small favor. He took Sierra through many large and small workshops, and even a place where porters gathered to find temporary jobs. She visited canneries, mines, shoe factories, woolen yarn workshops, and all kinds of small factories, and she had some ideas in her mind. These workshops and factories basically already have a complete industrial chain and regular customers. If you want to make one that is exactly the same, you will need to purchase expensive machines and explore it yourself. In the end, the possibility of defeating the old brands is very small, and the probability of losing money is very high. At this stage, she can only accept some jobs that are purely manual and low cost. It was almost evening when Sierra rode back to town. After saying goodbye to Hank, she planned to go home and think about it first. The doors and windows of the butcher shop opened by the werewolves on Holkier Street were ajar, and the light shone through the cracks. Several miners gathered at the door and chatted with Gail. Seeing Sierra, Gail greeted, "Are you going out alone today? What happened to your skirt?" "I got some rabbit blood." "It's okay." "What are you talking about?" She dismounted and looked into the store, and found that there were a lot of animal furs hanging on the walls, but there was no trace of Eric. "A railway is going to be opened from Walton to Worley, and we are looking for workers." A stained miner spoke to her, his eyes unabashedly admiring her without any malice. "You are so beautiful, Miss Sarah. Everyone has heard of her." "Thank you." "Is it a train?" Sierra asked. "Yes, trains need to recruit a lot of people, and the wages are good," Gail said. Sierra nodded and listened to their conversation continue. "Ms. Vera's laundry prices have gone up again, ugh. How luxurious of you to send your clothes to a laundromat frequented by nobles. What else can we do? The laundress's job is so full that it's not my turn. Cambona County is mainly engaged in mining, metallurgy, and machinery. Male workers wear coal dust work clothes all year round. It is difficult to wash away the dirty things without leaving them to the laundry." Sierra's eyes suddenly lit up as she listened. "Wally's Steam Laundry serves the nobles and charges high prices, so why can't she serve the workers at the lowest labor price? Soda ash for washing clothes and some hand-drawn wooden barrel washing machines are low cost, aren't they just what she needs?" "Sierra? Why are you coming out at this time?" Eric came from a distance with fresh meat in both hands. "It's nothing, I'm ready to go back." Sierra quickly walked over and kissed him on the cheek. When the other party was surprised, she whispered in his ear, I will be grounded when I go back tonight. I won't be able to open the store. Falai, please remember to come to me with some celebration wine in the evening. Are you grounded? Eric asked worriedly. What happened? How can I come to you? Didn't you climb through my window before? You should do the same on the opening night. She quickly pecked the side of his face again, then turned around and mounted her horse and hurried away, bringing wine to open her window in the middle of the night. Eric's face suddenly turned red. Has she not remembered your crazy kiss that night? Gale walked up to him, and his sensitive ears caught every word of the mosquito-sized conversation between the two. No, I didn't tell her, Eric replied softly. Then you are still going to get her drunk? Gale frowned. This is immoral. Sarah is a nice person. I know. Eric carried the meat into the store. Of course he knew. I'm on PK today. Where are your votes? Comments are here. Why has it become less? It's become less and I can't speak anymore. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 81. I know Eric brought the meat into the store. Of course he knew, but Sierra was a noble lady and she regarded him as his best friend. He didn't want to break this relationship and let the two of them become friends in the future. No. Sierra, who was riding away on horseback, had just come out of the corner of Holkier Street when she saw Rose Hill, who was also coming out of a big house on the street. The street in front of him was full of cars, and the store sign hanging high above his head was brand new, with the back of a graceful woman engraved on it, and a circle of small colored light bulbs lighting up around it. If you look closely, you can see that it is still a very gaudy store name. Lebajay Academy. Good guy, really good guy. Sarah looked at the expressionless blonde duke across half the road for a few seconds. Behind him came Aldine, and a beautiful girl wearing only a waitress's apron on her upper body, which was not covered up. The turbulence is extremely eye-catching. Sarah lowered her mouth decisively, drove the horses and turned away. Sella Rose Hill called her softly. Sierra stared straight ahead without even looking back. She had not yet digested the scene she had just seen, so she did not want to talk to him for the time being. After the horse walked down the street for a few minutes, a black vintage car drove up beside her and walked parallel to her on the street. Inside the half-downed car window, a cold male voice asked, "What happened to your skirt?" Sierra turned her head, lowered her gaze, and faced the pale and handsome face hidden in the darkness of the car. Her voice was coaxing. A waitress's theme party? I didn't even know the Duke liked to play with this. Her unreasonable answer made the car silent for a few seconds. That's my property, it's newly opened today. Sierra reined in the horse, stopped her hoofs, and said in a softer but still angry tone, "Oh, then I wish you a prosperous business." The classic car stopped at the same time, and the slender fingers covered with leather gloves pushed open the door. The young man in a suit and leather shoes sitting next to the door said with bottomless dark eyes, "Come up." Sierra hesitated for a while, then shook her head decisively, "No, I'm going home, Dad is still waiting for me to eat." Aldine opened the door and got out of the car, and directly called a coachman from the street who was waiting to start work. He handed the man a few banknotes, pointed to Sarah's horse, "Take it back to Mawson Manor, and then follow it there. Tell the butler that Miss Sarah will have dinner with Duke Rosehill and will go back later." "Yes, sir." The itinerary was clearly arranged, and Sierra reluctantly had no choice but to dismount. She really wanted to go home, but today another piece of land was taken away from Rose Hill. After thinking about it, she should be more obedient. This now he is his biggest creditor. She walked to the car door, and the people inside sat down and made a space for her. Sierra bent down and got in. The car door closed with a bang, and the dropped car curtain blocked several lines of sight outside the window. Occasionally, street lights that lit up at night shone on the white curtain. "What happened to the skirt?" Rose Hill asked again. Sierra replied in a muffled voice, a litter of rabbits died at home and were stained with blood. You went to see Eric, his tone was not good. How do you know? Sierra turned her face and saw Rose Hill taking off her gloves. Her hands, as white as porcelain, were exposed little by little, and there were gems on each of her slightly convex fingers. This red, blue, and green color combination would be a disaster for any hand with flaws, but there is no dissonance on these hands. The facets of luster refracted between the gems complement the snow-white skin. Sierra unconsciously stared at his action of taking off his gloves, which is something that people who don't control their hands would love. After taking off her gloves, Rose Hill folded them and put them in her pocket, then turned to her and asked, "What did you do?" It was obviously supposed to be the scene where she questioned him about visiting J Hospital, but the status of the conversation was reversed as soon as they got in the car. The other party's strong aura made Sierra feel guilty, but she didn't do anything today, so there was nothing to feel guilty about. She sat upright and said, "I didn't do anything. I just met him while passing by the butcher shop and said hello." "Hello," Rose Hill's voice deepened, and his eyes were cold. His cold thumb pressed her lips and rubbed them hard from side to side, just saying hello. "The smell here is so strong that it can't be concealed at all, a disgusting, repulsive animal odor." The question without warmth was like a poisonous snake crawling across the tip of Sierra's heart, making the cold person shiver. Inexplicably, she recalled the words she had said in his small manner. He is good at creating and destroying anything that does not belong to him. "Why are you angry?" "I just gave Eric a kiss before I said goodbye." "Don't you greet someone with whom you are close by kissing each other face to face?" Sierra, who was pretending to be calm, hugged his arm and managed to save her lips, "And I'm not angry with you yet. Those beautiful girls are all wearing white aprons that can't cover their breasts. You can see it with your eyes, but you're here, right?" Rose Hill narrowed her eyes slightly and looked at the jealous girl in front of her with a bulging face. "I never kiss on the cheek." "Really? I've kissed you many times." Sierra poked his lips and cheeks, and said dissatisfied, "Aren't these and here my cordial greetings? Everyone does this, why are you unhappy?" "Of." For a moment, Rose Hill was silent. He didn't deny that what she said was correct, but he didn't want to admit it in his heart. "I'm not angry," he explained firmly. "Oh, now I'm angry." Sierra, who escaped, let go of his arm and turned to face the window, angrily saying, "Those girls all have better figures than me, no wonder you are not interested in me." Rose Hill frowned and replied, "There is no comparison." Sierra turned her head in shock. She was angry. She was really angry. Could anyone be so openly insulting? She moved her butt and squeezed next to him, and her white hands angrily pulled up the collar of the suit without a trace of wrinkles. "Am I so bad?" Rose Hill looked at the blushing little face that suddenly came closer, and there was a faint smile in her eyes. She would be mistaken. The classic car driven by Aldine climbed up a slope, and Sierra's body followed the ascetic suit's chest in front of her. But she was really shocked tonight, and she didn't want to seduce him at all. She let go of her hand, and as soon as her hips moved back a little, the long arms behind her wrapped their arms around her waist and pulled her back. "What I mean is that you are different from them. There is no comparison between you and the goods for sale in the store." Rose Hill lowered her eyes, and her hard palms clenched slightly against her soft waist. He regarded her as a descendant who could be transformed personally, so her existence was unique and unparalleled. Sierra lay on his chest and stared at his flawless beauty. After a while, she asked, "Am I unique?"